could the systems and the methodologies that I had been developing over the course of my career be leveraged for somebody that is either just starting out or struggling to reach to the next level? And as I do with anything, I said the only way to really know the answer to that question is to go and try it and run an experiment. And I thought, well, who would be the best person to run that experiment on? And I thought, why not myself? Because I had never been in film or television. I was not a musician or a rock star. I'm not a professional athlete. And I was starting from zero. I had notoriety within the group that I had worked in, but not on a national or global scale.
It's time for another episode of the Shaun Tabatt Show, a podcast where I connect you with thought leaders from across the globe, digging into some of my favorite topics like personal development, marketing, spirituality, and pretty much any other shiny object that happens to catch my attention. Today, my special guest is Brendan Kane, and we're going to be discussing his book, 1 Million Followers, How I Built a Massive Social Following in 30 Days. Brendan, thanks for joining us on today's show.
Thanks for having me, Shaun. I really appreciate it.
I've had a lot of eagerness and excitement looking forward to this interview. I was traveling last week, and so I had tons of time in airports, on planes, and cars. And so I think I listened to at least 7 or 8 podcast interviews with you just to get a feel for your voice and your story, which is actually a little bit out of the norm. I don't normally have this much time to get excited about an interview, so I'm very eager to be able to share our conversation with my followers. But first off, let's get into what you might call a bit of the Brendan Kane origin story. As you look back, I'd love to hear about what are some of those experiences from, say, either your childhood or your growing up years that prepared you for the path that you're on today.
Often people ask me how early on did I know that I was an entrepreneur. And I don't think I fully recognized myself as an entrepreneur until I graduated school and got into the workforce. But looking back on my childhood, I remember certain times at a very young age where I was literally just picking up my toys as a young kid, probably like 6 or 7, and walking around the neighborhood, knocking on neighbors' doors by myself, trying to sell my toys to the parents of childhood friends. Just looking back on that, I think that was the first iteration of me wanting to forge my own path, get out there and try and build things and create things and sell things. So I think that from an early age, and I don't know what really sparked that, was one of the onsets that led me to the career that I have built over the past 15 years as an entrepreneur.
You have one arm that's shorter than the other, and this is something you had to work to overcome in a relationship to sports, and maybe specifically tennis. I'm curious how that experience played into some of the drive or determination that you have in your life today.
Yeah, so when I was born, I got stuck in the birth canal. And because of that, there was some issues with my right arm where I can't fully extend my right arm. I got pretty much most of the mobility and, obviously it functions properly. It's just when I got into sports and even as a young kid, when I was trying to prop myself up, I had to constantly use my left arm. And the interesting thing is I'm naturally right-handed. So I write right-handed, but I had to, from a very early age, learn how to leverage my left arm and my left hand as the dominant one. And that also extended over to sports where naturally, if you're right-handed, you would learn how to shoot a basketball right-handed or play tennis right-handed. I had to learn how to do everything left-handed. And I would say that probably, in studying human behavior and human psychology and how the brain works, I think it wired my brain a little bit differently and gave me a different perspective and the ability to kind of think outside the box. And I know that's a term that a lot of people use, but I think that's one of my strong suits. I can often look at different problems and come up with unique solutions that may not be really transparent to most people when they initially look at a specific problem.
Well, next, let's fast forward into, say, your college and early career days. What are some of the defining experiences that paved the way for your future work as a digital strategist and a growth hacker? I think one of the interesting things about the type of work you do is that some of these things weren't on anybody's radar or didn't even exist when you were growing up. So what were those experiences that steered you specifically into this direction?
Yeah, so I initially went to film school to learn the business side of film because I really wanted to produce movies, and that was my first love. And as I got into college, I started to realize that they don't teach you much about business in film school. So I figured the best way to learn about business is to start my own. And the most cost efficient way to start a business at the time, and it still holds true today, was to start internet companies. So I started 3 internet companies while I was going to film school, really just to learn and experiment. I wasn't trying to build big businesses or anything like that. It was just this creative thing that I wanted to build things and see what it took to actually manage and construct a business. And that really set me up for when I moved out to LA to pursue a career in film. And this was around 2005, because the entertainment industry started to reawaken to digital after the dot-com bust. And there was a lot of high profile people asking questions about how to leverage digital, how to leverage social to promote their movies, to promote their brands. And I've always come from a standpoint of I want to provide the most value to people. And the way that I've seen to provide value is having something that is unique to you and unique that stands out above everybody else. And looking around me, I just noticed that there was thousands, if not tens of thousands of other people that wanted to become producers, but there was only a select few that had the knowledge around social and digital platforms and when they were going. So I basically leveraged that knowledge in creating those internet companies while I was going to school to really forge connections and get on the radar with producers and directors and actors. And that really set me on the path of being a digital and business strategist.
And one of the things I've just appreciated about your story between what you share in the book and just some of the different interviews I've listened to is you know that success in building things takes time and it takes a lot of hard work. One of the things I liked from the early days of your story, you would stand outside and wait for, I think it was the CEO of the film company you worked at, just to be able to connect with him and ask questions and that sort of thing. Would love to have you share a little bit about why you went after that and why that was kind of an important development step for you.
Yeah, so one of the biggest contributing factors to the success of my career is being able to connect with people at the highest levels, whether that's the CEO of a company, a celebrity, or a professional athlete, because that's what I get asked a lot is, well, how did you get Taylor Swift as a client, or how did you license technology to MTV, or how did you forge connections with directors and producers? And it really comes down to providing value to people. That's the first and foremost, is providing value to people, understanding what their specific needs and goals are, and then more importantly, being able to articulate how you can provide value in a succinct and easy to understand manner. So with the story that you're referring to is early on when I started, my first job in the entertainment industry was for a movie studio. And I was looking for that edge. I was looking for that way in, that way that I could provide value and connect with people at the head of the studio. And one day I was delivering scripts into the office and I just heard the president of the company basically saying, I don't understand why none of the PAs, which in the entertainment world is a personal assistant, which are people just do anything that is needed, whether that's making coffee, delivering scripts, or making copies. He was saying, I don't understand why any of the PAs don't really seek advice from me or ask questions to me. And I just realized that he's had a tremendous amount of success in his career and he's at a stage where he wants to mentor people. So once I heard that, then I'm like, okay, I'm going to be that person. And I stood outside of the office every day. And when he was available, I would walk him to his car and ask him questions. And there was a lot of days that he wasn't. He was talking on the phone, or I could just tell he wasn't in the mood. But that's how it initially fostered the connection with him. And when I was initially fostering that connection with him, it started around producing movies. But as I kind of saw that the value that I could provide was much more on the digital and social side, that's where I started to transition that conversation. And I would always test things. And I do this today as any meeting that I go into. I kind of ask specific questions and kind of see where their pain points are, see what they respond to, see what they're excited about, not excited about. And then I start tailoring the conversation and how I could provide value to them in that way. And that's where I started early on in the entertainment industry, is, again, in that example, starting really on the producing side and asking questions and trying to forge that connection, and then quickly transition to digital and social because I saw that that's where I could really stand out and make a difference.
I really like that you keep bringing up this idea of providing value. I think anybody who's freelance and been out there in that sometimes difficult space, you're often thinking about, if I can just get this big client, it's going to be a big deal for me. And how can I take advantage of that? How can I leverage that? Versus coming into those conversations with this idea of, okay, what's the way that I can provide value? What do they need? How can I serve them? And really remembering that these are people with emotions and feelings, and they're not just some non-person commodity that you can take advantage or pull from. I feel like if you come into those sorts of situations where you're only thinking about what you can take versus what you can give, it really changes the conversation that you're having in your head, and it impacts how you actually communicate with that potential client.
100%, especially when you're trying to work at the highest levels, whether that is a traditional celebrity like a rock star musician, an actor, or just a celebrity in your industry, no matter what industry you're in, or it's the CEO or your boss, is when you're dealing with people that have had a tremendous amount of success, you've always got to understand that they have people coming to them constantly every single day with their hands out looking for something. And if you really want to stand out and connect with somebody at the highest levels, you've got to come in with the approach of, I'm just here to provide value. I'm trying to find where is it, what elements can I help them? What are the pain points that they have? How can I solve those pain points? Because that's really where you're going to foster those strong connections and be able to secure partnerships, secure jobs, secure clients at the highest level. Because if you take that other approach, they're just going to be like, oh, this is just another one of these 20 conversations I have to have every day, and you're just going to blend in with everybody else.
So you've made a career, obviously, out of helping others scale on digital, scale on social media. Why was it time for you to do this for yourself? I love the story and understand why, as a guy who works in publishing, it makes a fabulous story for a book. But for you, was it to give yourself the challenge to see that if you could do it for others, that you can also do it for yourself? I'm curious about the motivation there.
So the idea was seeded one day when, I was just looking back on my career, and I had worked with people at the highest levels, building platforms for a Taylor Swift or Rihanna or Vice or an MTV, and having success with them was great. And I always keep challenging myself and testing things and seeing what's possible. And just one day I was like, okay, this is great for people at the highest levels, but what about people starting from scratch? Or what are people that are not at the highest levels that are trying to scale? Could the systems and the methodologies that I had been developing over the course of my career be leveraged for somebody that is either just starting out or struggling to reach to the next level? And as I do with anything, I said the only way to really know the answer to that question is to go and try it and run an experiment. And I thought, well, who would be the best person to run that experiment on? And I thought, why not myself? Because I had never been in film or television. I was not a musician or a rock star. I'm not a professional athlete. And I was starting from zero. I had notoriety within the group that I had worked in, but not on a national or global scale. So that's where I set out to run this experiment on myself, leveraging the methodologies and testing processes that I had been building for my higher tier clients, and proceeded to use that to build 1 million followers in 100 countries in 30 days on Facebook. And from there, I knew I live in a world of hook points and how to really capture people's attention. And I knew that that was a strong hook point, and that's where it led me to securing an agent, which led to a publishing deal, which led to the book being published. And through that process, I thought, okay, I've done this experiment. And again, I didn't do it to make myself famous or an influencer. I just purely did it to see what was possible. And from there, I just thought, okay, I really want to get more into thought leadership. I want to publish more books. I want to speak around the world, run workshops, and advise people all over the world on their growth strategy. So then I started to build on top of that the fundamentals of building out my brand and pushing that out and solidifying that foundation.
And one of the things I know I've heard you bring up at least once or twice so far in our conversation is this idea that it needs to be global or reaching a global audience. Why is it important, especially in this digital space or our current economy? Why do we need to be thinking globally and not just say, if we're based here in the United States, just about reaching people in the U.S.? Why is the outside world vitally important for where we're all going in the future?
It depends on who you are and what you're trying to achieve. Obviously, if you're a mom and pop shop in a local town, going global doesn't really mean anything. If you're an e-commerce store that only can ship in the US, it doesn't mean anything. But if you are anybody that's entertainment, whether that's an actor, director, an author, somebody that's putting media out into the world, or even somebody that's just educating, to me, the global picture is far more interesting. I'm not saying that you have to, but there's just a significant opportunity outside of the U.S. I mean, because you look at the U.S., I don't know the exact number, but it's over 300 million in the population, but there's over 7.5 billion people in the world. It's just, there's such a bigger market out there. And I think people really underestimate the power of that. And, one of the areas that I'm really fascinated with is emerging markets, such as like Indonesia, India, and Africa. Like India, for example, there's 1.3 billion people in the country, and it's going to be the world's largest population in under 5 years. And to me, like, there's such a huge opportunity there, especially coming from the entertainment industry, where few people realize 60 to 70% of box office revenue from films today is coming from international territories and not from the US. And there's certain films that are literally being saved by international box office where they're failing domestically. So to me, I think that there's a tremendous opportunity with social platforms and digital platforms where they've connected to the world, where I could literally cultivate an audience of 1 million people in India in less than 48 hours. And people may frown upon that and be like, oh, well, what's the value of somebody in India? The per value of an individual in India versus the US is not equal. It's probably like 5 or 10 to 1. But the scale there is tremendous. And if you look at the smartest people in the world, whether that's Mark Zuckerberg, Facebook's largest user base is in India. And I think it's roughly like 360 million users. And yet there's 1.3 billion people in the country. So they're investing heavily in order to get those other billion people, because that'll represent an additional third to the overall user base. Or there's been stories about Google, who has been investing over the past 3.5 years in these weather balloons to try and connect the rest of the world to the internet, because people don't realize there's 3.5 billion people in this world that don't have access to the internet. And Google's trying to bridge that gap because that's where they know their next 3 billion users are going to come from. So right now, I think that there is about a 2 to 3 year window where people aren't really focused on the international territories and international markets, where you can really make a name for yourself if that's interesting to you. To me, that is. Like, I want to connect with people and share my knowledge with people all over the world, not just the US, Canada, and UK. And that's where a big focus for me is, because I see that opportunity that not a lot of people are focusing on, except for the most successful people in the world. And I tend to follow strategies from people that have done it and have reached critical scale and have had tremendous success.
So when it comes to the global audience, there are still some early wins to be had before everybody else catches on to that. Is definitely something that's emerging and something to be aware of if you're in a space where that makes sense to you.
100%.
For this middle part of the interview, let's just have the working assumption here, because I work in publishing and all of my friends are authors and PR people. The context here is, let's say we have an author who's launching a new book, just to kind of set the stage. So let's use that as sort of the backdrop for getting into a little bit of the meat of what you cover in the book. Would love to have you give some commentary on this idea of properly or effectively choosing an audience and why we need to be so specific. Because I think a lot of times people are like, yes, my book is for women age 35 to 55, but they don't niche down much more than that, to the extent where they know how that can impact their messaging and how they're trying to connect with people. Would love to have you just talk about why it's important that we be specific enough with the audience we're trying to reach.
First of all, I think it's important not to just guess at your audience and actually test and validate that. Because I get thrown into a lot of situations, even at very high levels, where they come in and they say, okay, this is our core audience, or here's a piece of content we want to push to this core audience. And you ask them, well, how did you make that decision? And most of the time, it's just a creative hunch. They're just guessing. And you can be right with the guess that you're putting out there. But to me, it's really important to validate those decisions to make sure that you are effectively reaching an audience in an engaging way. And I'll just give you one example of that. So I worked on a campaign for a company called Chatbooks, and they're one of the largest photo printers in the world. They have about 1 million subscribers. That's, where you can print your photos off your camera roll and we'll mail them to you each month. So they came to me with a Mother's Day campaign with some really strong creative that a friend of mine had produced. And they're like, well, we really want to send this creative to mothers 45 plus, because we really think it's going to resonate with them. And I said, well, let me actually just test and see what happens and open up that targeting a little bit. And when I did that, when I started getting the data back, I was seeing that it was actually resonating with females 18 to 25. And what was actually happening is those females 18 to 25 were sharing and tagging their mothers in the posts. So what was happening is the content was really resonating with this younger demographic because of the way that it was produced. And it was striking an emotional chord that they wanted to share and get their mothers to participate and say, thank you for being such an amazing mother and happy Mother's Day. So you are reaching your core audience, the core audience that they wanted to reach in a far more powerful way because it was a daughter sharing it with a mother versus a brand sharing it with a mother. In addition to the fact you were hitting a brand new demographic with your audience. So I think it's super critical, first and foremost, to always test and understand, okay, if my audience is females 45 plus, is the content I'm producing generating the intended response that I'm looking for? And then if it's not, okay, why isn't that happening? Is the fact that just the content wasn't working, or is my product or service actually better served for a different audience? Because those are two distinct ways that you can go about the strategy. And obviously, narrowing in on your core target audience allows you to effectively communicate with them far better. So if you know that my audience is females, I know that it's a specific age group, you can tailor your content specifically to that audience. And it generally makes your marketing efforts more effective. That's not to say that you have to alienate other people. It's not to say that if you're producing content for females at 35 plus, that it can't resonate with males, because it can. But just getting really specific about who you're creating content for, how you're communicating it, and making sure that you're doing it in an authentic way. And that's where I've seen it pay dividends for the people that I've worked with in the past.
So in effect, you just walked us through the three phases of your methodology: the hypothesize and test and pivot. What's the scope or scale where that's going to be meaningful for somebody? I would imagine that's going to vary based on what you're trying to do, what kind of product you're trying to launch. But to test effectively, talk to how that scope or scale might start at the beginning and how that could maybe shift as you're going through the process.
Yeah, it's a great question, because obviously the scale that I do it at is pretty robust. I always recommend start with small steps and then work your way up. So start with as simple as just measuring the current content that you're putting out there. Create a spreadsheet of measuring each piece of content in terms of the engagement metrics, likes, comments, shares, link clicks, and start measuring it at a simplistic level. Then like the next step is the system that I built, which the book is really based on, is we've built a system on top of the Facebook and Instagram advertising platform, and using it not as really an advertising tool or a media buying tool, but as a market research tool, because the level of targeting is so specific and so granular that you can segment out all these different variables. You can segment out the demographics. You can segment out the geolocation down to the specific zip code. You can also go down to what their specific interest levels are, what products and services they buy, what movies and television and music do they consume, down to like, did they go to college? What is their household income? All these different variables are at your fingertips, and allows you to quickly segment who you're pushing your content to and measure the response based upon that audience. So you can measure, if you're pushing out a video, okay, it did this type of performance with males 35 to 50 years old versus females 35 to 50 years old, or it did this performance of people in Los Angeles versus people in Chicago, or it did this performance of people that are interested in comedy movies versus horror movies. Like all of these different variables you can interchange out, and it allows you to really segment tests at scale and learn how to package your content, what themes and formats or stories that are resonating with specific audiences, so that you can get very good at understanding how to produce content that's going to generate the intended response from the audience that you're trying to reach. And once you learn the system, like you could take one piece of content and create hundreds of variations of it. And it sounds like a lot of work, but once you understand the fundamentals of how to construct these tests, it scales exponentially and it becomes easier. And I will just say you become light years ahead of any of your competition in terms of your level of understanding of your audience and level of understanding of your content strategy, and to be able to scale that once you find something that works.
Related to that, when it comes to scope and scale, how should we be looking to intelligently leverage paid media? How much should we spend? Because obviously a part of growth hacking and looking for rapid growth, you're going to have to do some paid promotions, sponsored posts, and advertising really to move this train along at a faster pace. What should that look like?
So first and foremost, you've got to define what does the return on investment look like for you. Is it a direct ROI where I'm just trying to sell a product and I need to make a profit off of that? Or is it something different where I'm trying to build a large social following because it'll help me secure a publishing deal, it'll help me secure an agent, or help me secure more paid speaking gigs? So really diving into what is the ultimate return on investment that I'm looking for? And what does that look like to you? Like, how much more money are you going to make off of that? And sometimes it's intangible, like sometimes getting a publishing deal or getting an agent. There's not a dollar amount specifically associated with it, but it can pay dividends over the course of your entire career. So really understanding it. Why am I investing this money? Why would I spend even a dollar on paid media? And then backing into what that ultimate goal looks like. And then what are you willing to spend? What are you willing to sacrifice in order to hit that goal? Because that will really dictate what you spend. So I'll give you an example for myself. So with the book that I currently published in October, I've started diving pretty intensely into Amazon ads. And right now, I probably lose about $5 or $6 every single book that I sell through Amazon ads. But the return on investment that I got off of the amount that I have spent has already been 15x because I've secured clients from that, because I'm getting more validation around my brand and credibility. So to me, the conversation around Amazon now, and this is the conversation I like to get all of my clients into, it's not how much money are we spending, it's how much money can I spend? The conversation right now is how can I scale that? If I'm getting 15x return on investment off of Amazon ads, how much money can I spend before that breaks, before that caps out? So that's really where I always recommend people start, is really defining that for themselves. And then that will specifically dictate how much money you can and should spend.
Yeah, that's definitely true. I mean, I'm thinking about if I'm trying to build a large follower base, that might be one goal, but maybe later that's to promote a product or a book that I might have. One of the examples I like that you gave in the book was talking about an actress who she was in a competitive situation for a role. And because she had a larger Twitter following, she was able to get a role when there was another actress that she was competing against who maybe was a slightly better or more experienced. But because she had this social clout, so to speak, behind her, that put her out in front. Because when it comes to marketing, whether it's a film or any other product, how much of a following people have social media does matter, because we're often, whether we're talking about books or movies or whatever it is, people who are a part of making that product are often tapped to promote it and create social buzz about it. And so I just thought that was a really fascinating application of, even in that kind of a case, it's not always about talent. Part of it's talent and platform sometimes.
Yeah, it happens all the time in the entertainment industry, and I'm getting more and more people reaching out to me that have either published books that are trying to get their next book deal, or people that are just starting out in the publishing world and just trying to garner the attention of agents and publishers. And everybody's really paying attention to the number next to your name on social platforms, for better or for worse. That's kind of the world that we live in today.
Next, let's talk about the idea of, say, staying power and sustainability. Once we build this massive following, how do we try to keep it going? And then related to that, why is it important that we focus on who we really are? And this is something I coach a lot of the authors I work with on, is the persona that you project online, make sure that's who you really are. Because if people are following you because they really connect with that persona, it needs to be something that you can maintain and keep going over the long term. Versus if it's not really who you are, it's very difficult on the far end where you get tired of that because it's just not who you really are at your core.
So both of those questions really blend well together. So how do you have staying power? I mean, one of the most important things is you have to be authentic, because you need to be producing content that really resonates with you, that you're excited about producing, that you're excited about creating, because if not, you're just going to burn out. And that's one of the things that I always talk to people about. And people come to me sometimes and they're like, I don't really like social media. I don't like social platforms, but I feel like I have to do it. And I'm just like, listen, if you're not into it, don't do it, because it takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of work. If it's not something that you're excited about, whether you're not excited about doing or you're not excited about the potential, just don't do it. Find another way. Social is not the only way that you can be successful in publishing or in the entertainment industry. There's other ways to go about it. So first and foremost, make sure that you're choosing the content that really resonates with you, that comes off authentic, and that's fun and exciting for you to create. because that's one of the most critical parts of success, specifically when it's staying power. The second element to success that I really talk to people about is be a student of how content is socially packaged. And what I mean that, what are the formats that people use? So one of the exercises that I do with clients is make a list of all of the people that are currently speaking to your audience and who are the people that are being successful. And I'm not talking about the outliers. So like, for example, if you're a musician, I wouldn't look at Taylor Swift or Rihanna because those are just outliers. Like they're at the highest levels. I would look at people that have 100,000 to all the way up to 1 million followers and be a student of how they're packaging their content. So specifically with video, are they using captions? Are they using meme cards? Like meme cards are the burned in headlines at the top of video. What type of meme cards are they using? What does the first 3 seconds of their video look like? How do they end their videos? What are the calls to actions? And become a student of what socially packaged content is working for the people that are already communicating with your audience so that you can then filter your message through that. I'm not saying copy their message, but copy the way that they structure their content. And for staying power, you have to constantly be a student because it's constantly shifting, because the social platforms are always changing in terms of the algorithms and the way they're being structured. And then also the consumption behavior changes, like different trends are happening all the time. So you have to constantly be learning and trying new things with the content that you're producing to ensure that you can be successful in the long term. You can't get into a place where you're complacent with the content that you're producing. Is always be a student of the game and always strive to get better and smarter.
Now that you've, I don't know if it's fair to say you've mastered Facebook, but you've obviously developed a lot of expertise about how to scale fast on Facebook. What are some of the other platforms that you're going after right now? I know right now you've been doing a lot of work on Instagram. So where else are you looking to apply some of these same principles?
I've dove in pretty deep on Instagram over the past 4 or 5 months and really have narrowed in on the success and growth principles around that platform. And that's where a lot of my core focus is on right now. I've worked on Facebook for about 3.5 years, perfecting that. And the focus really has been on Instagram. And now I'm also intertwining LinkedIn into that as well, because I see a significant amount of growth potential with the LinkedIn platform in terms of brand building as well.
Any thoughts on where the conversation is at with Twitter? I've noticed for myself and some of the clients and authors I deal with, the Twitter conversation really seems to be slowing down. Just curious if they're a player in this kind of growth or just something to be a part of, but necessarily not focus on.
They're a player, but they're not growing. They're declining. So is there value in the platform right now? Yeah, I would say that there's value. I mean, I don't know what the exact user number is, but I think it's around 300 million. But that pales in comparison when you look at Facebook at 2.2 billion and Instagram at, I think, 1.1 billion. And YouTube, I don't even know what their numbers are specifically, but it's in the billions of views each month. So to me, if you look at it from the overall perspective, and if you're looking for areas to grow, I probably wouldn't focus on Twitter. But again, where I always suggest clients start is, what is the platform that you love the most? What is the platform that you use every day? And start there. Because again, you need to be excited about it in order to have success. But for the long term, I think Twitter's always going to be there. But I don't see Twitter making any leaps and bounds in terms of growth in their engagement numbers or user numbers. So to me right now, the most valuable platforms are Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. And from a growth perspective, I would say Facebook is the easiest to grow at scale. I would say Instagram is most valuable from a brand perception level. So if you're looking for endorsement deals or becoming an influencer. And then YouTube is most valuable from a consumption behavior. YouTube is one of the few long-form content consumption behavior platforms outside of podcasts, which podcasts I look at not as a social platform, but as a content medium. But with YouTube, you can get people to watch videos for 5, 10, 15, 20 minutes, where Facebook and Instagram, I mean, you're dealing at the attention span of anywhere between 30 to 60 seconds.
Well, I think one of the things that's crippled Twitter through the years is just the lack of specificity when it comes to their advertising offerings. And that's why you've seen, especially Facebook and Instagram, win in that way. You know, I wonder if Twitter would actually make a change to their advertising options, if that could help bring a shift to their platform.
I think it definitely could. I tested the Twitter ad platform extensively, and I just did not get the return that I was looking for comparable to Facebook and Instagram, the level of reach and engagement that you can get with the Facebook and Instagram platform, which are one and the same, and it extends to WhatsApp as well, is just far superior than what Twitter did. And I wish that they would revamp that platform, but it just hadn't. Like, I would take a second look if they revamped the way that their platform was structured and also the costs in the auctions. I feel like Twitter is very overpriced comparable to what you can get with the other social ad platforms.
Well, just a couple more questions here as we begin to wrap up. As a guy who works with lots of authors, I'm always curious about what an author learns on their journey in the experience of writing a book. So for you, is there anything you do differently or something you learned about yourself in the process of writing 1 million followers?
I don't know that I learned anything different about myself, but I learned a lot about the publishing world. I think one of the most fascinating things that I've learned is that if you want to be, and obviously there's outliers that just go to bestseller because the word of mouth and virality around a book is just so strong, and those are just outliers. So I look at things that are systematic in terms of scale and growth. And what I've learned that if you want to have a successful book, you can't market the book. You've got to market something else. You've got to have some type of additional return on investment in order for it to make sense. So for example, the analogy I gave you about how I'm leveraging Amazon ads right now is I lose $5 or $6 for every book I sell, but I've gotten 15x on the return on investment of that Amazon ad because I was able to close one significant client off of that. And I've also had other very high level people reach out to me based upon seeing my ads in Amazon. So to me, I look at book marketing as what is that ultimate return on investment that you can get? Is it an online course? Is it getting more speaking engagements? Is it selling your book, if it's a fiction book, selling it as a TV show or selling it as a film or setting you up for your next book where you can get a significant advance? So really reverse engineering the end goal beyond just the book being published. Like, what does that strategy look like so that you can get very specific about how much you can invest in marketing that book and being able to measure that effectively once that campaign does launch. And that was really a valuable lesson for me and has really opened up my eyes at the potential of publishing books and how to market them effectively.
Yeah, that is one of the things I talk with authors about quite often is, well, yes, you definitely want to sell this book, but really as part of the journey of promoting it is what is it doing for the future of growing your platform, growing your audience, looking to future book deals, selling a product, that whole kind of thing. It's just one, I always say it's one of the tools in your toolbox as you're trying to connect with an audience in a meaningful and hopefully mutually beneficial way as you look to the future.
Yeah, because I heard multiple times in the process, a book is just a loss leader, but that's so vague. Well, what does that mean? Okay, it's a loss leader. Now, what's the strategy to actually generate the return on investment for that loss leader? Any author that I work with today, it's getting very strategic about that in understanding what are the marketing channels, what are the costs associated with those channels, and what could be the expected return on investment from the other products or services or things that you're trying to put out in the world or achieve based upon the book being published.
Well, Brendan, for the listeners who are interested in connecting with you, finding out more about the book and some of the different services that you offer, where are some of the places they can find you online?
Yeah, so the book is at 1millionfollowers.com and one is spelled out. It's all in retail stores. It's on Amazon. And people can reach out to me directly. My email is B as in boy at seekers, SEAKERS.com. That's B as in boy at seekers, SEAKERS.com. Or they can direct message me on Instagram at Brendan Kane.
Well, like we do with every episode, we'll be sure to have detailed links in the show notes, places where you can pick up your own copy of the book and where you can connect with Brendan as well. We'll have that all linked up for you right over at ShaunTabatt.com. It's time to bring this episode of the Shaun Tabatt Show to a close. Many thanks for being a part of my conversation with Brendan Kane. Once again, our book today was 1 Million Followers, How I Built a Massive Social Following in 30 Days. Again, if you want to connect with Brendan, a good place to find out more is his website, and you can find that at 1millionfollowers.com. And Brendan, I just want to say thanks so much for sharing with us today. It's been a great pleasure and an honor to have you on the show.
No, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.